silent cowboy bought a blind Apache woman for $5.00, then discovered her world was full of light. Dakota Territory, spring of 1861. A crossroads town of dust and debt where men came not to settle, but to forget. The market sat just beyond the saloon, under canvas tarps stretched between warped poles. Flies buzzed over crates of apples, bullets, and cured hides. The air stank of sweat, whiskey, and horses, and today of something fouler still. A circle of men stood near a crude wooden platform, no more than a cart with its wheels locked and two barrels propping the rear. On it stood a girl, no older than 20, barefoot, wrists tied in front. A thick gray cloth was wrapped around her head, covering her eyes entirely. Her dress was torn at the hem and stained at the knees. She did not tremble, but she did not lift her chin either. A tall, sunburned trader in a tobacco vest barked toward the crowd. "Last one for the day, gentlemen. Not much to look at, hell, you cannot even see her. Apache stock, though, strong, quiet. $5 to start." Someone in the crowd laughed, sharp and ugly. "Quiet? She's blind, you fool!" Another hooted, "Covering her eyes so we do not all turn to stone, maybe, face like a curse." "She walked past my coop yesterday," a third man jeered. "My hen ain't laid an egg since. I say her eyes are poisoned." The trader raised his arms. "Come on, boys. She can still work, clean, cook. Hell, she will not even see you coming." Roars of laughter burst like firecrackers. Still, the girl did not flinch. Someone spat in the dust. $2, a drunk man slurred. "I will pay $2 just to see what is under that rag." "No touching," the trader warned. "This one is skittish. Has not said a word in 2 days. Probably thinks she is cursed herself." A hush fell. From the back of the crowd, boots approached. Heavy, deliberate, slow. The men turned. A tall figure in a dark coat stepped forward. His beard was thick, sun-bleached at the ends. His hat shadowed most of his face, but not the eyes. Those were blue-gray, tired, and unreadable. Jonah Blake. He had not been seen in town for months. Lived out by the ridge, alone, with his horses and his silence. He walked past the other men without a glance. At the edge of the cart, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bill. He unfolded it slowly, held it up between 2 fingers, and placed it down on the edge of the wagon. $5, he said. The trader blinked. "Well now, did not think we would get that far. You sure, mister?" Jonah nodded once. "You do not want to hear her speak first? Try her out, maybe." Jonah looked at the girl. The wind lifted the hem of the cloth around her eyes. Her face beneath was pale and drawn, but not broken. She was listening. He spoke, just loud enough for her and everyone else to hear. "I do not need to see what I came to save." The crowd shifted uneasily. "You do not want to know what you are buying?" the trader pressed. Jonah's voice came again, calm, flat, final. "I am not buying her to look at." Silence. Someone coughed. The trader shrugged and reached for the bill. "All right then, sold." He untied the girl's wrists roughly and shoved her forward. She stumbled off the cart but caught herself. Jonah stepped back as she landed, giving her space. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He only turned and waited for her to follow. She stood still for a moment, head tilted, as if trying to hear the man who had bought her. Then, slowly, she moved, toward the sound of his boots on dirt, toward the silence that felt more human than the laughter ever had. And with that, they left the market together. One man with no words to spare. One woman with no eyes to see. and yet somehow they had recognized something in each other that no one else had. The trail home stretched long and narrow, cutting through dry grass and pine. Wind whispered through the trees, carrying a hush that felt older than words. The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the path in long shadows and amber light. Tiva sat behind Jonah on his horse, her body rigid, fingers clutching the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. She couldn't see, but her senses grasped everything: the creak of leather, the sway of Jonah's breath, the silence between them. Heavy, watchful. It pressed on her more than any touch. She smelled pine on his coat, earth in the wind, moss damp and thick beneath old rocks, and she heard every hoof against gravel, every breath Jonah didn't take too loudly. He was quiet like stone, but it wasn't cold, just unreadable, and somehow that frightened her more. The wind changed near the ridge, grew steadier, familiar. The cabin sat tucked beneath the trees, small and solemn, smoke curling from its chimney like it belonged to the sky, a place made not for comfort but survival. Jonah dismounted. His boots landed softly in the pine needles. He turned and held out his hand. Tiva flinched before she realized it, shrinking slightly, her head turning as if trying to see through the cloth tied across her eyes. She refused the hand, swung her leg over, and tried to dismount herself. Her foot slipped. She nearly fell, but he caught her, just enough. A hand to her arm, barely a breath's worth of contact. She jerked away. He let her go, said nothing, walked to the door. Inside, the air was cooler, scented with wood smoke and old herbs. Tiva moved slowly, hands reaching for walls and corners, finding shapes and textures to map the space. She didn't sit, didn't ask, just crept to a corner by a window where wind slipped through a crack. She crouched there, folding into herself like a leaf pulled into shadow. Jonah lit the stove. Pine snapped in the fire. When a log split, she gasped. Her hands flew to her lap, clutching the hem of her dress. He glanced over once, then turned back. Quietly, he placed a tin cup and bowl of water on the table, not near her, just there. Not offered, simply present. "It's clean," he said after a long pause. His voice was rough, low. "Drink when you're ready." She said nothing. Not because she wouldn't, because she couldn't. Her voice had dried up like a forgotten stream. Trust, too, was not something that came easy anymore. At dinner he ate alone. She stayed curled in her corner, listening to the fire and the quiet movements of a man who didn't press or pry. When he gestured toward the bed, she shook her head once, small and certain. She curled near the door, back against the cold wall, arms wrapped tight around her knees. The cabin creaked and groaned with every wind shift, and in her mind old laughter returned, cruel, echoing, unforgettable. She braced herself for the hand that would come, the grip, the voice, the pain. But it never came. Jonah rolled out a blanket near the fire, far from her, and lay down without a word. Morning came, soft and golden. The fire was ash. Tiva stirred not from sound, but from something unexpected. A blanket, thin, clean draped over her shoulders. She sat up, touched it lightly, and turned toward the sound of metal scraping wood. Jonah was sharpening a blade at the table. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But in that silence, something shifted. And for the first time in a long while, her breath didn't tremble. The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that only settled after rain had passed in the night, when the earth still held the memory of water and the wind moved with careful hands. Jonah had risen early, as he always did, stepping out onto the porch with his boots unlaced and a mug of coffee cupped between his palms. He paused mid-sip when he saw her. Eva was outside. She stood just past the front steps, barefoot in the damp dirt, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts that hung loose at the wrists. The gray cloth still covered her eyes, tied tightly at the back, but her head tilted ever so slightly, as if she were listening to something the world whispered only to her. She moved slowly, one hand stretched before her, the other tracing along the porch post. Her fingers lingered on the carved notches in the wood, then slid to the edge of the railing, down to the fence that lined the little herb garden. Jonah did not speak. He stood still, letting her move in her own rhythm, watching as her bare feet pressed into the soft earth. She stopped at the rosemary bush, bent slightly, and brought her fingers to her nose. She smiled. Then she kept walking, toward the chicken coop, the rain barrel, and the slanted side of the cabin, where wildflowers sometimes grew between the cracks of stone. She stepped carefully, each footfall light but unsure, as if learning the language of this place through the soles of her feet. She was memorizing the land, not with her eyes, but with her skin, her breath, her heart. When she neared a dip in the earth near the old well, her foot caught on a root, half buried in mud. She stumbled, arms flailing slightly, body shifting off balance. Jonah was there before she fell. His hand wrapped around her elbow, the other pressing gently to the small of her back. He steadied her, not with force, but with presence. She gasped, startled by the touch, then stood still. For a moment she did not breathe. Her face turned up, though her eyes remained covered. He did not let go. Then, finally, her fingers loosened at her sides. He spoke, quiet as the morning. "Let me show you." She nodded. "Just once." He released her elbow but did not step away. Instead, he brought her hand to rest against his forearm. She gripped him lightly, uncertainly. They walked. He led her to the well first, placing her hand on the old stone rim, letting her feel its age, the moss, the cracks. Then to the coop, where the hens stirred softly, feathers rustling under their breath. She laughed when one clucked close to her leg. He showed her the stable, the slope of the doorframe, the smooth rails of the gate. She ran her fingers across the weathered wood, pausing now and then to listen, to inhale. They circled back toward the east side of the house, where the apple tree stood crooked and half wild. Spring had not yet coaxed blossoms from its limbs, but it carried the promise of them in its stillness. As they passed beneath it, her foot caught again, this time on a stone nestled in the roots. She gasped and tilted backward. Jonah caught her, his arm curling gently around her waist, holding her steady. Her hands clutched his shirt for balance, and for a brief second their chests nearly touched. She froze, breath shallow. He said nothing, made no move. Slowly her fingers released him. She stepped back, and though her eyes could not meet his, her face turned toward where she felt him stand. A flush of color rose along her cheekbones. Her lips parted, then closed again, unsure. He cleared his throat, awkward in the way only quiet men are when emotion surfaces uninvited. "I'll fix the path," he murmured. She gave a soft, almost imperceptible nod. Then, after a pause, she whispered, "Thank you for not letting me fall." His voice came low. "You're allowed to fall. Just don't have to do it alone." She stood there, still, the breeze tugging gently at the hem of her shirt, her hair catching light from the rising sun. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not for her eyes, or her scars, or her silence, but for being here, for learning the shape of a place that might one day be hers. And him, the silent cowboy who said little but always stood steady, He was beginning to feel like part of that place too. The wind had been restless all afternoon. It moved through the pines with unease, rattled Jonah's shutters and made the chickens pace in tight, agitated circles. The sky had darkened barely, but enough for Jonah to notice. Clouds gathered slow and low near the southern ridge. There was no thunder, not yet, but something was coming. Inside the cabin, Tiva sat by the window, her fingers resting on the sill. The gray cloth still covered her eyes, but her face was tilted toward the wind, as though listening to more than its sound, something deeper. "There's cold wind from the south," she murmured, "the kind that bends trees, not just shakes them." Jonah paused at his workbench, wiping oil from his hands. "The earth smells wrong," she added, "and the birds are silent." He stepped to the door and opened it wide. The wind hit his face like a warning, sharp, metallic, cold. Rain. He smelled it now, too. Trouble. How bad? "Bad enough to tie down the roof," she said. Jonah didn't hesitate again. He moved. Within minutes he was outside, securing barn latches, covering hay, moving the horses into the strongest stall. The clouds deepened to slate. Then the wind roared. This storm wouldn't knock first. Tiva stood on the porch, arms crossed, her head turned toward the sky she could not see. She listened to the wind the way others might read a map. She counted its pauses, its pitches, its warnings. When the storm hit, it hit hard. Rain fell in heavy sheets. Thunder rolled low, steady and mean. It cracked branches, soaked paths, and flooded anything unguarded. But inside Jonah's barn the roof held. The animals were dry. The feed was safe. Because she had known. By morning the sky had cleared. The land shimmered in puddles. A few shingles gone, one barrel cracked, but the cabin stood. The fences held. Jonah walked the yard quietly, eyes scanning the edges of survival. On the porch, Tiva sat with a mug between her palms, her face calm. He approached. "You saved the barn," he said. She turned slightly. "I heard the wind." He crouched beside her. "You didn't just hear it," he said. "You read it." She smiled faintly. "My grandmother said the wind always speaks before the storm. Most folks don't listen." "Well, I did, this time." She was quiet a moment. Then, "I've never been right before, not in a way that mattered." He reached into his coat, placed a warm loaf and folded cloth beside her. "It mattered to me." Word spread fast, how Jonah Blake's place held firm while others lost roofs and stock. When asked how he'd known, Jonah just said, "She heard it coming." Some scoffed. The blind Apache girl? But others remembered the wind, the silence before the storm. After that day, folks stopped whispering about her. They started nodding instead. She still wore the cloth, sometimes. But when she walked through town on Jonah's arm, people stepped aside, not in fear, but in respect. Because when the wind changed, it was her who knew. And that kind of knowing came from something deeper than sight. The market smelled of tobacco, fried onions, and freshly churned soap. The sounds were louder than usual, boots on gravel, laughter that cut sharp, the clink of bottles, the scrape of crates being dragged into place. Somewhere, a fiddle played out of tune. Jonah held Tiva's hand lightly as they walked, his thumb brushing across her knuckles from time to time, reminding her of his presence. She moved beside him without hesitation now, her steps confident even without sight, her body attuned to the pulse of the land beneath her boots. They had come for salt and a roll of twine. It should have been a simple trip. But then, his hand felt her stiffen. Her body went rigid mid-step. Her breath caught in her throat like it had been lassoed. And her other hand, the one not holding Jonah's, slowly clenched into a fist at her side. He turned to her, alarmed. Her face had gone pale beneath the edge of the gray cloth. Then she whispered, so faint it barely reached him, "He's here." Jonah's eyes scanned the crowd. Tiva's lips trembled, but no words followed. She seemed paralyzed, not by fear alone, but by something deeper, older, something rooted in blood and memory. And then he heard it too. A laugh. Low, harsh, familiar to no one but her. It came from a man standing near the edge of the trading stalls, a knife on his belt and a wide scar across his jaw. He was laughing with another man, unaware or uncaring of the ghost standing 10 feet away, shrouded in gray cloth and panic. Jonah did not ask questions. He did not need to. He placed a firm hand around Tiva's shoulders and turned her toward the wagon. They walked away, steady but fast, through the noise and the heat and the sudden roar of her past, crashing into the quiet world they had. Back home she sat by the fire, silent for nearly an hour. Her fingers dug into her skirt, her head bowed low. Jonah did not press her. He sat nearby, sharpening a blade with slow, rhythmic strokes, offering her the silence she needed, not the questions she could not yet answer. Finally her voice rose, cracked and dry. "I wasn't born blind." Jonah stopped sharpening. "I used to climb trees," she said. "I could spot deer from across the field. I used to braid my little brother's hair, because I was the only one who could do it without hurting him." She swallowed hard. "But one night men came to our village, white men, laughing, drinking. They dragged my cousin out by her hair." Jonah's grip tightened on the blade. "I tried to stop them. I screamed. One of them hit me, the other shoved me down. Something sharp, metal, dug into my eye. I remember blood. I remember the stars disappearing." She lifted a hand to her face, hovered it near the cloth. "They said my eyes looked dead after, hollow. The village women were afraid to look at me, said I carried bad luck, so I covered them." Her shoulders curled inward. "I've been hiding ever since, from them, from me." Jonah stood slowly. He walked to the drawer near the wash basin and opened it. After a moment he returned with something small folded in his hand. A scarf, thin, soft, the color of clouds just before the rain, white with the faintest thread of blue running along the edge. He knelt before her. She felt a shift in the air, the quiet weight of him kneeling, and tilted her head slightly. He spoke low, the words like steady earth. "No one gets to define you by what they broke." He reached up and gently untied the rough gray cloth from around her head. Her breath hitched, but she let him. Then, with hands that had never touched her without reason, he wrapped the silk scarf over her eyes, clean, soft, new. Not to hide her, to honor her, to give back something she'd never been offered before. Choice. She reached up, touching the fabric, and whispered, "It doesn't feel like shame." He met her words with stillness. "It's not." And in that quiet, something heavy lifted from her chest. Not the memory, but the belief that it still owned her. The first sign was the hoofbeats. Tiva heard them long before they crested the ridge. 4 horses, maybe 5. Fast, spaced apart unevenly, not the methodical clop of a wagon or the lazy rhythm of riders passing through. No, this was something else, urgent, aggressive, and behind it all, a sharp, cruel laugh, riding the wind like a ghost. She stood on the porch, her face tilted toward the horizon, her fingers twitching slightly at her side. The breeze carried more than sound, it carried intention, and this wind was full of warning. Jonah came out a moment later, rifle in hand. "They're coming," she said. He paused, reading her posture more than her words. She turned slightly, listening harder. One of them is him. Jonah did not need to ask which one. Within an hour, the townsfolk had gathered at the cabin, men from nearby homesteads who had come to respect Jonah's quiet steadiness and who had begun to trust Teva's rare, uncanny insight. Jonah explained the threat. A gang looking to claim the land, led by the very man who had once tried to break her. Teva sat near the door, eyes covered in the white scarf Jonah had given her, her face calm but alert. "He'll come from the south trail," she said softly. "He always rode with his left hand low. His horse favors the right side. Listen for the uneven steps." The men looked at her, skeptical at first, but Jonah nodded, and that was enough. They set their trap along the south ridge, rigging brush and wire, positioning marksmen in the hollows. Jonah stood at the center, rifle loaded, heart steady. Dusk fell fast. Then came the horses. 5 riders burst from the tree line, just as she'd said. They rode hard and loud, not knowing what waited ahead. The trap worked. One horse went down. A second rider was unseated by the hidden wire. Shots cracked through the stillness. Chaos broke loose. But even in the clamor, Teva could hear what others could not. From inside the cabin, she knelt against the floorboards, hand pressed to the wood, head tilted. "To your left," she called through the open door. "One circling around the back fence. He's lighter on his feet." Jonah adjusted his aim and fired once. A scream answered the shot. She turned her ear toward the barn. "There's another, behind the water trough. His boots scrape when he crouches." Another shot. Another thud. And then silence, broken only by the wind. When the dust cleared, the gang was scattered, 2 wounded, 1 dead, the rest riding hard away from the valley, their plans and pride torn like flags in a storm. Jonah returned to the porch, face streaked with sweat and gunpowder. Teva stood slowly, her head turning toward him. "It's over?" she asked. He nodded, then caught himself. "Yes," he said aloud. The townsfolk gathered, murmuring in disbelief. One of the older men, gruff and gray-bearded, removed his hat and looked at Teva with new eyes. "She's the one who led this," he said. "She heard what we couldn't, knew what we didn't." Another man nodded. "She saved our skins." "She can't see," a younger boy added quietly. "But she saw the whole thing clearer than we did." Jonah looked at her, something reverent in his eyes. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're a compass." The crowd fell silent, not from awkwardness but respect. From that night forward, no one spoke of her with pity or suspicion. They called her what she had become, the ears of the valley, a woman who saw not with her eyes, but with something deeper. And in doing so, she'd shown them all how to listen. Spring crept softly into the valley. The frost melted day by day from the wooden steps of the porch, and small green blades pushed through the old soil as if testing the world again. The wind no longer carried warnings, it carried warmth, a breeze that smelled of sap, of coming rain, of something new and unspoken. Jonah sat in the shade of the porch with a wooden board balanced on his knees, his knife working slow and steady along its grain. Teva sat beside him, barefoot, knees drawn to her chest, the white scarf loose around her neck instead of covering her eyes. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to the carving itself. When he finished, he set the board gently on the porch between them. She reached for it immediately. Her fingertips grazed the edges first, then moved inward, tracing every line, every groove, carved with patience and purpose. It was a map of the land around the cabin, yes, but not of its physical borders, not in the way others would draw it. This map was made of memory. "This," he said softly, pointing as her fingers touched it, "is the fence where you first found the rosemary. I marked it with a curve, like the way you smiled when you caught its scent." Her lips parted slightly. "And here?" He guided her hand. "That's the well, where you stumbled the first morning. You said the stone felt older than the trees." She laughed gently. "It does." Her fingers moved further. "And this?" Jonah hesitated, then placed his hand beside hers. "That's the apple tree, the root you tripped over, the place I caught you." She went still. Slowly, she reached out and laid her palm flat over that point. Then, with equal care, she let her other hand find his, still resting beside the board. Her fingers closed around his. "I've lived in places where I could see everything," she whispered, "but felt nothing." Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with something more fragile, truth. "But here, where I see nothing, I've come to know everything that matters." Jonah said nothing. He only held her hand tighter, as though to steady something inside both of them. Tiva turned her face toward the wind. It played with her hair, with the corner of the scarf at her neck. "I don't need to see the sky to know it's above me," she said. "I don't need to see your face to know you're watching over me." She turned toward him, blind eyes lifted. "Jonah, you're the place I want to stay, whether I ever see again or never do." He swallowed hard, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "Then stay," he murmured. "This place, it was never home until you found it." She smiled, quiet, certain. And as the wind swept gently over the porch, rustling the map of memories between them, Jonah knew something simple, something profound. Love didn't require eyes. Only presence. Only choice. Only the quiet courage to reach out and stay. Spring came late to the hills that year, but it came gently. The snow melted in slow, silvery trails, soaking into the thirsty ground, coaxing blades of green to rise around the stones like soft declarations of life. Buds appeared on branches still rough from winter, and the wind blew warmer now, no longer sharp with warning, but smooth, playful, like a hand brushing hair from a sleeping face. Tiva no longer wore the scarf around her eyes. She had tucked it away in a drawer weeks ago, not with defiance, but with grace. Her hair flowed freely down her back now, catching light as it danced in the breeze. She moved through the yard without hesitation, her feet sure, her body tuned to the land. She could tell where Jonah was just by the rhythm of his boots on the porch. She knew the sound of his breathing from 10 paces away. That morning, Jonah sat on a bench near the stables, oiling the old saddle he used only for long rides. The leather creaked under his hands. His fingers moved slowly, not from weariness, but from thought. On the porch, Tiva ran her hand along the carved wooden map he had made for her, the one marked not by rivers and roads, but by memory. She traced a small dip on the board with her finger. "The place where I slipped," she said aloud, smiling. "Where you caught me." Jonah looked up from his work. She turned her head toward the sound of his tools, her voice soft. "What color is the wind today, Jonah?" He stood, set the saddle aside, and walked to her. He sat beside her on the step, letting the warmth of the wood seep into his back, the sunlight resting gently on his shoulder. Then, without hesitation, he answered. "It's the color of life," he said, "because I'm no longer living it for myself." She turned her face toward him. He kept going. "I wake up thinking about your smile. I walk softer so you can hear the birds. I breathe deeper just to share the same air with you." Tiva was still, listening not just to his words, but to the way his voice trembled ever so slightly as he spoke them. "I used to think I needed silence to survive," he continued, "but now I think I was waiting for someone who could hear what I couldn't say." Her hand found his cheek, rested there with quiet purpose. "I used to believe I was someone to be hidden," she whispered. "Something broken, something shameful." She shook her head, voice thick with emotion. "But you never tried to fix me. You just let me be." She smiled, wide, luminous. "And when you gave me the choice, I chose you." Jonah took her hands in his. He looked into her face as though it were sunlight itself. "Then let me ask, just once and never again." He swallowed. "Will you marry me, Tiva?" Her laugh came out with a tear, warm and trembling. "I've been yours since the night you covered me with that blanket and said nothing at all." They were married that Sunday. A simple ceremony under the apple tree where she had once fallen, and where now she stood tall, in bare feet and a linen dress the color of early fog. Jonah wore his cleanest shirt, the sleeves rolled just once at the cuffs. The whole village came. No one looked at her with fear anymore. Children danced near her hem, calling her the woman who hears the wind and the one who talks to birds. Old women brought bundles of herbs and smiles that didn't pity. The blacksmith played a fiddle off-key, and nobody minded. Before the vows, Jonah pulled something from his pocket. A scarf, white silk, clean and light. He lifted it and placed it gently on her head, where it settled like a crown, soft as a promise. It was the same scarf that once covered her eyes. Now it crowned her, part of her story, but no longer her cage. And as they kissed beneath the soft sky, with wind brushing their shoulders and blossoms just beginning to bloom, neither of them thought about what had been lost, only what had been found. Not sight, not sound, but home. Meet each other. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the wind change with Tiva and Jonah, then you understand. Not all love is seen with the eyes. Some love is heard in the silence, felt in the steadiness of a hand, and chosen every single day. Here in the Wild West, where the land is harsh and hearts are harder to trust, stories like theirs remind us that even the most broken beginnings can lead to beautiful endings if we listen close enough. Thank you for riding with us through this journey. If you believe in love that heals, that honors, that defies the dust and time, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We've got many more tales waiting for you, of longing, of redemption, and of souls who dared to love when the world told them not to. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a story that might just stay with you forever. Until next time, may your trail be gentle and your heart never ride alone.